sons and their lineages. These are all from the Bible. This is how they made it. This was made in 1900. So and this is good because with this timeline down here is what's happening around the world. So they lined up a lot of the world's history with the Bible history. So if you ever want to get this, let me know. I'll let you know how to get one. But it's 23 feet long. I don't have space in my house to put one up. I don't have a wall that's 23 feet long. So, but when you explain genealogy like this, you see where people were. You see where other world powers came into being. And you see where the books of the Bibles were written. So that's why. So when you read genealogies, it's history. It makes it more accurate. So that's it. Sorry? I found it online. And I gave Oh, I don't know. It's from, they made it in 1900, and they kept publishing since then. So I'll give you it. I give that information. But it's pretty good because it lays out the genealogy in a line. Once you do that, you got a family tree and all that stuff. So it's verifiable history. Because when it coincides with other world events, you can see how the Bible lines up with world events. Another reason for the genealogy is it confirms prophecy. In Isaiah 11, verse 1, it says that there shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out from its roots. And then in verse 10 it says, and in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, who shall stand as a banner to its people. So this is like you can see the genealogies point to the King Jesus. So that's confirmed by Matthew 1 genealogy and Luke 3 genealogy. It also gives insight to God's character. It shows a detail-oriented nature of God and his interest in individuals. I didn't write these down. They have two verses there. But it gives a lot of information about people, how God interacts with people throughout history. You also learn from people, not just Jewish people, but also the Gentiles. You have genealogies that have Gentile names in there as well. You have Rahab, you have Ruth. So it shows how God integrated a lot of people who were not Jewish from the Jewish line, integrated other people from Gentiles. So in the biblical time frame, the Old Testament from Genesis to Malachi covers roughly around 3,600 years. Genesis alone covers about 2,300 years, while Exodus and Malachi covers about 1,200. There's a years of silence between Malachi and the birth of Jesus, about 330 years, and the New Testament covers roughly about 90 years. So to simplify this, it's basically from Adam to Abraham is about 2,000, from Abraham to Jesus is another 2,000, and Jesus to today is another 2,000. So roughly 6,000 years. Any questions? That was right before Jesus was born. Yeah, so when Malachi, the book of Malachi was written, there was about 300 years of silence that God spoke to no prophet, no person. Yes. So I'm getting a lot of this information from other books as well, but also there's a first century historian, Jewish historian named Josephus. Yes, Josephus. That's it. Pastor Rogers got the right pronunciation. But he wrote a lot during the first century about the history of Israel. So it's amazing to see how much information he has from back then. We still could have it today. So just to get into the timeline now, we're going to start from Abram. So on map number 1, you see on the bottom right there where it says Babylonia, there's a city of Ur. So the city of Ur is down there. So Abram's father moved his family up to Haran, which is up north. And then God called Abram, to leave his family to go to a place that he will show him. So this is found in Genesis 12. Lord said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and your name will be great. And you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you. And you and all your families on earth shall be blessed. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him. So he took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all their families and herdsmen from from Haram down to Canaan, which is on the first map. So took all their possessions, livestock, servants, to an unknown land that God promised them. So the question is, would you be able to do this? God tells you to go to a strange land, not knowing where you're going. And you got to walk there. God said, I will show you. God just said, go that way. Okay. How many of us nowadays will actually, when you hear a prompting of God to do something, would you actually do it? So that's a testament on our side to see if we will actually do what God says. So in this, God presents Abram with a lot more promises. In Genesis 12, 6 and 7, and God says, to your descendants I will give this land. In 13:15, he says, for all the land for which you see, I give you to you and your descendants forever. Not for 2,000 years, not till they change the name to Palestine, but it says forever. Genesis 13:16, that Abraham's descendants would be numerous. In chapter 17, Abraham's name was changed from Abram to Abraham at the time. He will be a father of many nations. Genesis 15 gives the boundaries defined by God, which was promised to Abraham's descendants, which was from the river Egypt to the river Euphrates. Later in Joshua 1:4, it was from the wilderness to this Lebanon, and from the wilderness and Lebanon, as far as the great river Euphrates, in the land of the Hittites and the Great Sea. So if we look at map number 2, I skipped something. Map number 2 is where he journeyed. He went down to Canaan and then went to Egypt, and then he came back to Canaan. If you turn a page over to map number 3, this is what most people believe what God promised to Abraham. So from the Nile River all the way to the Euphrates, and roughly from the end of those rivers to the north, past Lebanon, and to the Great Sea, which here we have the Mediterranean Sea. Right now, Israel has about a postage stamp size of that. If you could probably just put a dot where Israel is right there, that's what they have right now. And every time there's a war, they want them to give up more and more land. So this is what God has promised Israel. So after, and then Genesis 22:18, there was a promise of the Messiah, because in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Because of all the descendants Abraham has, is the eventual coming of Jesus the first time. So Abraham has Isaac at a very old age, and they stay in Hebron, and it grows the family more. Isaac had Jacob and Esau, and because Jacob stole everything, or Esau gave up his birthright for a meal and then gave up a blessing because he wasn't there. Because of Esau, his brother's anger, Jacob had to run away. So he ends up back in Haran where Abraham started. And he worked for his uncle up there for 14 years to marry first Leah, because he got tricked, and then the one he loved was Rachel. He also had 12 children. And on the way back, going back to Canaan, he had an encounter with God where he wrestles with God, and he's holding on to God, and daylight was coming, and he didn't want to let go until he got a blessing. And that's where God touched his hip, and he became lame in one side. But then he also changed his name his name to Israel, and he returned to Canaan. Map number 4. Did I do this right? So on that map number 4, you have Joseph. Joseph was one of the later sons of Israel, Jacob, now Israel. And because he was a firstborn of Rachel, which was Jacob's first love, he kind of spoiled him, and his older brothers got really jealous of this. So here's where Joseph gets betrayed by his own brothers and sell him off to slavery. And in map 4, you see where he went up there by Dothan, where his brothers were, and they were about to kill him, but then Reuben said, let's just sell him, because that way we don't kill him. If he dies later on, it's not going to be our fault. So they sell him into slavery, and these Ishmaelites, this is a major trade route for Egypt. So Joseph ends up all the way into Egypt. The story of Joseph, we've heard most of it already, but he gets elevated, he gets betrayed, he gets thrown in prison. While he's in prison, he's running the prison, and eventually he gets out of prison because he interprets a dream about the 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And from that point on, he was elevated to number 2 of all of Egypt to start gathering grain for that 7 years of plenty to survive the 7 years of famine. So when that famine happened, that affected Canaan as well. So his brothers were sent by their father down to Egypt to buy grain. And through some orchestration of God throughout the whole time, God brought all his family to Egypt to live with him. They eventually settled in Goshen, which is just south, just right in the middle of the Nile Delta there. So roughly 66 to 70, depending on which Bible verse you read. If you count the wives or the extra children, about 70 people from Jacob's line went to Egypt. So while they're there, they're prospering. They're getting bigger. And when the Pharaoh that was under Joseph, after Joseph dies, the Pharaoh that was above Joseph dies, the new Pharaoh came in, knew nothing about Joseph, saw more than too many of the Israelites sitting there in Egypt, thinking they're going to overpower them. He made them all slaves. So now you see they're under slavery, as it says in Exodus 12:40, for about 430 years. And then after a lot of prayer and supplication to God, Moses comes out of this, trained by Pharaoh himself to be a part of his family, because he was saved by God in the Nile River when Pharaoh's daughter pulled him out. And after 40 years of being trained by the Pharaoh, he kills another Egyptian, gets scared and runs. He ends up in Midian, where he encounters God at the burning bush. God tells him to go back to Egypt to get my people out. So after 10 plagues, Moses finally gets Pharaoh to let God's people go. So on map 5, there's a lot of speculation where the Red Sea crossing was. It could have been up north, could have been down south. Where Mount Sinai is, where the law was given to Moses. But you see here that on this map, they actually crossed the Gulf of Akron, that little sliver of sea. In that area, they found artifacts. They found sand burned like the glass. When the Egyptians were coming, there was a pillar of fire that burned that heated up the sand to glass. They also found on the other side of the river, there's a mountain there, which they believe is Mount Sinai, where the top of the mountain is all black. It's all burned, like sulfur burned. That's where God's presence was, according to Exodus, where the mountain raged with fire and there was a big cloud. They also found that in that area, there's a little dip in that gulf. It just goes, it's only 900 feet across, but there's a little dip in the sandbar, and then it goes up like this, like a ramp. So if you push away the water, they could easily go on down and up. So that's what archaeologists found a couple years ago. They also found chariot wheels that are left underwater. So people don't believe the Exodus story. They say, how can people, the whole Egyptian army got destroyed when they crossed the Red Sea, and some people say it was only a couple inches of water, And they say, well, they all drowned in 2 inches of water. They all drowned in 2 inches of water. So, but that's where they ended up. And this is where God sets up his Mosaic covenant. So in Exodus 19 through 25, God sets up his law for his people to obey. And again, like Pastor Roger said on Sunday, the laws are not written to hinder us. The law is there to liberate us. If the law says do not murder, we're okay. If you murder, you're going to have a lot of consequences. So the law is not there to prevent us from having a good time. It's there to liberate us. You don't have to be in fear of being prosecuted for something. So in Exodus 19:5 and 8, God tells the people, now therefore, if you indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And then verse 8 says, then all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So again, it's if you obey. It's a conditional thing. We could be Christians and not do what God tells us to do, and then we suffer consequences, and then we decide to blame God for it. Oh, I'm a Christian. Yeah, but did you follow his teachings? Did you follow his law? So it's a conditional thing. In Deuteronomy 28, there's the full chapter. It has blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. So God tells Moses to tell the people. So verse 1 and 2, it says, now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all of his commandments, which I command you today, that the Lord your God will set you high above the nations of the earth, and all the blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, because you obeyed the voice of the Lord your God. So after that, there's 12 verses of blessings. You will be prosperous in farming. You'll be prosperous. You'll be protected from your enemies. You'll be abundance of blessing. But then, verse 15 turns, and it says, but it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully his commandments and his statutes, which I command you today, then all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Then he lists 51 curses. So it's like only 12 blessings and 51 curses. If you're getting 12 blessings, you're probably getting a lot more. We don't understand how much a blessing it is to be safe and secure, good health. Sometimes we take those for granted. We cannot fathom certain things that God does. We cannot fathom what eternity will be like. We can't fathom what heaven is like. We have concepts of it. But the blessings are enormous. God's blessing will overflow. 51 curses, the verses of curses are horrible. You'll be overtaken. People will steal from you. Your crops won't grow. So how much more simpler it is to follow the Lord? Get the 12 instead of the 51. Get what you can. Because one blessing leads to another. And sometimes we grow in this country, we see a little thing that goes bad and they say, oh, my world's falling apart. But we don't fail to see all the blessings. We see that little spot in the wall and we amplify it instead of looking at all the blessings around us. So that's a lesson there. So on map number 6, we have the land of Canaan. So the land of Canaan right now is filled with all the enemies of Israel. So Joshua, after Moses' death, Joshua takes the lead for the people because they were wandering for 40 years. And now they're going to be brought into the promised land. There's a lot of major battle victories, but the one thing they failed to do over this time period is they failed to destroy all the enemies of God as he commanded. So in Deuteronomy 20, 16 and 18, God says, but of these cities of these peoples which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance, you shall let nothing that breathes remains alive. but you shall utterly destroy them. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, just as the Lord commanded you to do, lest they teach you according to their abominations, which are done for their gods, and you sin against the Lord your God. We have to cut sin out of our lives. You let it fester, you let it stay there, it takes over your life. I believe if Joshua and his people, the Israel people, would have destroyed all the enemies like God says, they wouldn't have all these problems they have today. Because everybody left behind today are all descendants of those people. Right. So there's a lot of things going on in Israel now. I won't get into it now, but maybe next week. But it's when we have sin in our lives, just like God saw these people were sinful people. If you leave sinful people in your life and you still hang out with them when you're Christian, they will influence you. They will make you serve them under their sin. So we have to be very careful when, as Christians, we don't emulate what other non-Christians are doing. They might be our friends, but if they want to go drinking and hit strip clubs, we don't go. Because, I'm a Christian, I'm trying to help them. But don't fall into their trap. You live a life that's an example to them. So here we have now, after they get into the land, they didn't get rid of everybody. Now you have the book of Judges. You have 19 judges. So basically, Israel falls into the period where everything's good. They turn away from God. Some enemy overtakes them. They cry out to God for help. God calls a judge to liberate them. They celebrate, they get liberated, they're prosperous, and it just keeps going back and forth. This goes for 19 years. And the reason for this is they failed to teach the next generation of the glory of God. If we fail now to teach our children or grandchildren of what God has done for us, they won't know who God is. So we're responsible for passing it on to the next generation. Even if you don't have kids, you have other people in your life, you're responsible to pass the word of God down. Because we see here in Israel's example, they just went in a circle. They just kept going for circle. And this lasted about 200 years. And then they had a great idea to get a king. They wanted a king. So on map 9, this is roughly the kingdoms. So they wanted a king, and God told through Nathan, if you get a king, they're going to take your kids to war. You're going to serve him. And God told all these bad things the king would do because God wanted for them to accept him as king. Yet they wanted the king. And guess what? The king did exactly what God said that the king would do. So first you have King Saul, anointed, but then he got into trouble. Then David was anointed, but he didn't take over, and he was anointed at a young age, but he didn't overstep his bounds until King Saul was killed in battle. David becomes the next king, and so David he expanded the kingdom a little bit more, but because of some sin in his life, he was not able to build a temple that God wanted him to build. He was able to collect all the materials for it, but God commanded that his son would build a temple. So Solomon becomes king, and he builds this very big temple. But for David, there was a special promise to David. So this is the Davidic covenant, as the Jewish people call it. This is found in 2 Samuel 7. God told Nathan to tell David, I will appoint a place for my people Israel. I will plant them, and they may dwell in the place of their own and move no more. Nor shall the sons of wickedness oppress them anymore, as previously. Since the time I've commanded judges to be over you, my people Israel, and have caused you to rest from all your enemies, Also the Lord tells you to make you a house. When your days are fulfilled and rest from your fathers, I will set up a seed after you, who will come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish his throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. And your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever. So here, God is telling through Nathan to David that through his line, through his lineage, will come a king in the future, and this king will rule forever, which we all know is Jesus Christ. So these are the three main covenants that God gave his people of Israel. So Solomon chose wisdom above all things from God, and he received riches and other things, wisdom, riches. But he also built the temple according to the specifications. So now in map number 10, because of Solomon's proclivity in having a lot of women in his life, 300 wives and 600 concubines, and bringing other women from other cultures into the kingdom, there was a lot of unrest of who succeeds Solomon at this time. So when he died, there was a big rebellion. Israel split into two parts. The northern kingdom was Israel, which included 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom had 2 tribes. It was named Judah, which is after the line of David. So we went through this in our study, that Israel, the northern kingdom, on map 11. You'll see what happens. Israel, the northern kingdom, had 10 tribes. Samaria was its capital. They had 19 kings over 209 years, and all the kings were evil in the sight of the Lord. They did everything contrary to what God planned. First of all, they separated, but then every king besides that was evil. So in 722 BC, Sargon II of Assyria overtook Israel and sent them all into exile, and essentially they ceased to exist. They're not spoken of again in the Bible. So Israel comes down from the north. Assyria comes down from the north and just basically takes Israel and takes the northern king Israel into captivity. Judah fared a little bit longer. It lasted about 345 years. It had 20 kings. It had Jerusalem as its capital. He had 13 evil kings and 7 good kings. But towards the end, it was becoming really evil. And the Babylonian Empire in 606 BC, they overtook the Assyrian Empire, and then they kept going south, and they took over Judah. And they took a lot of captives back to Babylon, including Daniel. In 586 BC, Solomon's temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, and there's remnants. Some of the people of Judah stayed behind, but the majority were taken captive into Babylon. And in Jeremiah 25, 11 and 12, it says, the whole land will be in desolation and astonishment, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. Notice how God is very specific in his word. He didn't say 69. He was actually saying 70 years. And you'll see that come to fruition as we go forward. So a little pause here from the timeline, because while we're in Babylon, we get the book of Daniel. And Daniel has encounter with the king Nebuchadnezzar. So in chapter 2 and chapter 7, there's similar dreams and visions. One dream was given to Nebuchadnezzar. A vision was given to Daniel. But in both cases, there was visions of what's going to happen, next world empires. So you see the head of gold and the lion, which was in Daniel's vision, that represented Babylon, which was King Nebuchadnezzar through Belshazzar. The next one was chest and arms of silver, and in the vision was a bear, was raised on one side with 3 ribs in the mouth. That was the Medo-Persian Empire from King Cyrus to Darius II and Artaxerxes. The next portion was belly and thighs, which was bronze, And in the vision was a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. That was Greece, referring to Alexander the Great and his 4 generals. And then the last part was the legs of iron and feet that were mixed with iron and clay. And that refers to a beast, also 10 horns, which refer to the Roman Empire, but also a future empire that will come. That future empire is the Antichrist empire, which we haven't seen yet. Turning the page. But on the bottom of that statue, there was a stone that was cut out of a mountain, not by human hands. It was thrown at the statue's feet, and that statue crumbled to the ground, and they existed no more. That stone is Jesus Christ, setting up his eternal, everlasting kingdom. And the vision it actually says the Son of Man, which is Jesus Christ. So you can see how God is already laying out world events to show the people of Israel that God has not abandoned them. So through Daniel has a lot of prophecies, has a lot of specific things that's happening. And if you read Daniel like we're doing in our life group, we get into a lot of stuff that we probably never saw before. And you see things from a different perspective, especially in the world we're living today. So going back to our timeline, we see that, let's see. So after Babylon takes over Judah, we have the Medo-Persia Empire, which is just to the east. So that's on map 13. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused, sometimes lost, so sorry. So map 13 that's the Persian Empire. They basically overtook all of Babylon, all of the Israel, and most of Egypt into Asia, into Turkey, which is modern day Turkey now. So here we see in from Persia's perspective, in Daniel 5, we read that the Persians actually took Babylon without a fight, because the king Belshazzar was out there partying out in the desert. In Daniel 5, there was a mysterious hand that wrote something on the wall. And they all freaked out, but they called Daniel, because apparently Daniel knows things. And Daniel says, your time is up. And in that very night, the Persians took over Babylon without a fight, because they were all partying. They let down their guard. The Persians just swept over the city in one night, and Belshazzar was killed. So right there you have some prophecy already been fulfilled within the prophecy book of Daniel. So you have other parts, the Judah, Egypt, Libya fell to the Medo-Persian Empire. And then you have the courageous people of Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra goes to the King Cyrus and basically says, my land has fallen into disrepair, I have no temple. King Cyrus actually issues a decree to restore the Jewish community, and the Jewish people were allowed to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. That's on Ezra 1. King Darius, the successor, and the Persians actually paid for the rebuilding. God uses other nations to bless Israel to do God's doing. So Israel is like, all Ezra did was ask him, hey, we need some help. And the king says, okay, no questions asked. If you read Ezra and Nehemiah, there's a long speech that the kings give on why they're doing this. And they gave them support, they gave them military transport, they sent all these materials back to Jerusalem. So the temple was built in less than 20 years. It was rebuilt. And this fulfilled the 70-year prophecy by Jeremiah that they'll be in captive for 70 years. When the temple was done, that completes the 70-year prophecy of captivity. Then King Artaxerxes in 458 BC, they actually issued payments related to items. One thing I didn't tell you before is Babylon, when they took over the temple, they took everything out of the temple. All the gold artifacts, everything used for blessings, everything the priests used. Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar were using those and mocking the Jews. What these kings do in Persia, they give it back to the Jews to take it back to Jerusalem. So it's amazing how God uses them to bring everything back. So in 444 BC, King Artaxerxes establishes the right of Israel to rebuild the walls. So Nehemiah goes back, and they complete the walls around Jerusalem in 52 days. Now, the interesting thing here is you have all these, like Pastor Roger was talking on Sunday, you have all these people around Jerusalem mocking them, and they're building with one hand, sword in the other. They built the wall in 52 days. And Nehemiah 6 says something very interesting. It says, Nehemiah 6, verse 16, after they completed the wall in 52 days. And it happened when all the enemies heard of it, all the nations around us saw these things, they were very disheartened in their own eyes, for they perceived that this was the work done by our God. They recognized that they have a special God, that they were able to build a wall around the city in 52 days. So whenever you're out there doing work for the Lord, your enemies will recognize that. You know, so we have to be fervent in our work for the Lord. So now we have the Greek Empire, map 14. So here we have Greece. So we have Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great starts conquering all of Persia, which means all the territory that Persia had. And Alexander brought his rapid Hellenization, which is basically a spread of Greek culture, the language, and the religion. All these empires, when they went to other areas, they destroyed everything. They didn't want other people to remember Babylon existed. They didn't want to remember Persia existed. Greece came in and did the exact same thing. Alexander went to he renamed about 40, 50 cities Alexandria. You know, so proud of his name. Then he comes to Jerusalem. And interesting thing happens here in Jerusalem. Because in Daniel 8, written many decades before this, it talks about a ram and a goat. The ram is a small horn and a big horn that represents the Medo-Persian Empire. The goat represented the Greek Empire, had one horn, and after that, 4 horns came after it, which represented Alexander and his 4 generals. So you got to imagine the Jewish people remembering Daniel's prophecy here, Daniel 8. Josephus wrote in his diary, that in his book, that when the priests saw Alexander walk into the streets of Jerusalem, they greeted him. They knew he was coming. Why? Because in Daniel 8, it specifically says Greece will come. And they were waiting for someone who was great. Unfortunately, he wasn't Alexander the Great yet. We call him the great leader. But he's also the goat, which is the greatest of all time. So it just all fits. But Josephus says that the priests acknowledged Alexander. And because they acknowledged Alexander and the people acknowledged Alexander, Greece did not destroy anything that the Jewish people rebuilt during the Persian Empire. They kept everything the same. Not only that, Alexander did not build any Greek temple in that land. He didn't force their religion on them. He gave them the language of Greek, which was very important later on. But Alexander, because they got acknowledged, because of Daniel 8 prophecy, Alexander did not destroy Jerusalem. He just let it be, which is another amazing thing, because that completes another chapter of Daniel's prophecy. See, when you read the prophecy and then all this stuff happens, oh wait, that's Alexander, let him in. He didn't destroy the city like he did to everybody else. So, unfortunately, Alexander dies at the age of 32, 33. He thought he conquered the whole world. There was nothing left to do. So he dies very young. His 4 generals take over, which is map 15. So his 4 generals partitioned the land. So unfortunately, the 4 generals were not like Alexander. So you have Antiochus, who tried to force the Jews to abandon the laws and accept the Greek culture. And in 1657 BC, Antiochus actually desecrated the Jewish temple by sacrificing a pig on the altar, which is also a fulfillment of Daniel 8, verse 9 and 11, that there'll be an abomination at the temple. The Jewish priests at the time, Judas Maccabees, led a revolt and won, cleansed the temple, and rededicated. And this rededication is now celebrated every year as Hanukkah. So it's not in our Bible, but there is a group called the Maccabees. They were the Jewish people at the time. They caused the Greek people, that general, to leave Jerusalem. They cleansed the temple. And that's how they got the celebration called Hanukkah, which is celebrated every year. So now we get to map 16, which is the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire just comes in and conquests of Jerusalem in 63 BC. Herod the Great is appointed the king of Judea by Emperor Octavian. He begins to refurbish the temple and actually adds another courtyard to it. Right around this time, Jesus is born between 4 BC and 6 BC and 4 BC. They don't know exact date, but it's around this time. What's important here is the genealogy of Jesus found in Matthew and in Luke. So in Matthew, you have the genealogy from Abraham to David to Jesus. This shows the connection of Jesus all the way back to the father of nations, Abraham, but also to King David. It's very important for Jews to understand that he came from the line of David, but also from Abraham. Luke has a genealogy, but it goes backwards. It starts with Jesus and goes backwards all the way to David, all the way to Adam. But also Adam's called the Son of God. So it shows the connection to all mankind as king, all the way back to God. So in 6 AD, Judea becomes a Roman province ruled by a governor. And this is where Pontius Pilate comes around. AD 33 is when Jesus enters Jerusalem and is rejected and cut off. He's later crucified, rose victoriously 3 days later, and is seen by over 500 people. Now, this verse here in Luke is very interesting because this is when Jesus is entering Jerusalem, and he's entering on a donkey, and the people are praising him. And here it says, "Now as he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known, even you, especially in your day, the things that make your peace, but now they are hidden. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment around you, surround you, and close you on every side, level you and your children within you to the ground. They will not leave one stone upon another, because you did not know the time of your visitation." So Jesus cries at this point because he thought the people were ready to see him. And I'll explain that a little bit later with Daniel's prophecy of Daniel 9. But Jesus comes in and he cries for Jerusalem. Because he cries because he's going to go to the cross for these people. But they didn't accept him as a king. They just saw him as another person. And the Jewish Pharisees plotted against him. And they did not see who he really was. So I'll explain that a little bit later. So about AD 70, the Roman Empire destroyed the temple, not leaving one stone upon another, because they thought there was a lot of gold underneath the temple. So they literally took apart the temple, but also the foundations. That fulfilled Jesus' prophecy in Luke 19. So map 18 is the spreading of the gospel. Gospel spread throughout the Jews and the Gentiles and throughout Israel, Asia Minor, Persia, down to Ethiopia, India, and Italy. There were missionary trips by Paul and others to spread the good news. So here's some lists of some disciples, and this is what they believe what happened to them. Some historians have found out where they ended up, but how some of them have died for their faith. I mean, if you look at some of these, some were stabbed by spears, flayed to death by whip, thrown off a pinnacle, then beaten to death, stoned and beheaded, crucified upside down, impaled with iron hooks through feet and hung upside down. If you don't believe what you believe to be true, would you really want to die like this? It just shows that they were really sound and secure in what they believed. Nobody would die like this for a lie. So they went out. I mean, Thomas went as far as India. Matthew went down to Ethiopia. Jude went to Persia, which is Iran now. So they spread out quickly. And then John was a fortunate one. He died of natural causes, but he wrote Revelation on the Isle of Patmos. So that's where we end up today on our journey. But there's always an overlying theme through the whole thing, and I'll get to that in a moment. But I want to go back to what Jesus said about what Jesus did when he cried. And this is why I think, and a lot of historians think he cried. If we look at the passage from Daniel 9:24 through 27, it talks about the 70 weeks. We've mentioned it several times throughout our course of study. So this is what Daniel is saying to the Jewish people, to Israel. That 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your whole city, to finish the transgression, to make end of sin, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in the everlasting righteousness, to seal up a vision and prophecy, to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth from the command to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah the Prince, there shall be 77 weeks and 62 weeks. The streets shall be built again, and the wall even in troublesome times. And after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off, but not for himself. I'll stop there for now. So here he talks about the 7 weeks and the 62 weeks. So the 7 weeks is actually the 49 years it took to rebuild the city. When the wall, in ancient times, when you complete a wall around the city, that actually means the city is completely built. It's not built until the wall's done. Here we build walls first, and then we put everything aside. But the wall signifies that the city is done. So that's the rebuilding. 62 weeks is the 439 years, more years to the first coming of the Messiah. So you have 49 years plus 434 is 483 years. So in the 483 years from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem will be the coming of Messiah and his sacrificial death. So if you multiply 69 times 7 times 360, 360 is the Jewish calendar, a lunar calendar. We go by 365, which is a solar calendar. That's 173,880 days. So if you take from time from 444 BC, where King Artaxerxes established the right to Israel to build the walls, to AD 33, when Jesus entered entered Jerusalem and was rejected and cut off, you have exactly that amount of time, 173,880 days. From first day of Nisan, which is the Hebrew calendar, 444 BC, to April 3rd, 33 AD. It completes the prophecy of the first 63 weeks of Daniel's prophecy, where the Messiah was cut off from and crucified. So there's still 7 years left for Israel to go through. They had their 483 years. They missed it. That's why Jesus cried. They missed it. Jesus told Daniel that the Messiah was coming, and the Pharisees and the Jewish people missed it. That's why Jesus cried. Because he was there right when he told them he will be there. So now Israel is waiting for their 7-year tribulation period, which they will accept someone who's not Jesus Christ the King. So there's a reason why there's history. We study history, we learn from history, but we also see significant impacts. You see how God is in complete control all through the Old Testament and New Testament? So what makes you think that he's not in control now? If the Jewish people missed it because they did not understand, are we going to miss it? Are we missing opportunities to tell people about Christ? Are we going to be buying and selling in the days of Noah just because everybody else is doing it and not looking and waiting expectantly for Christ's return? And in that, we should be urgently telling people about Christ. You see the world falling apart but God is still in control. You see Syria being demolished in 12 days. And now you have a maniac terrorist in charge of Syria. You thought Assad was bad? This guy's worse. The devil you know, or sometimes the devil you don't know, is worse. But now he's right on the border of Israel. So when you see Israel, we'll see next week, from Jesus' time to now, the impact of Israel and how Israel is still important to God. Because if he already completed the 483 years, he's still got 7 more years, which is called the Jacob's trouble, which is a tribulation period. There should be an urgent expectancy from all of us to be attentive to God's voice on who we talk to, be examples to them, but be ready to, at any time, to give your testimony and reach others for Christ. So, I hope you enjoyed it. I like history. History gives us a foundation. That's why I keep reading it. I like documentaries. I watched Lord of the Rings, the first one. The other one's right, Star Wars, like the first one, But when you put years and dates of very important events, of very important parts, it means more. So if you study history the way through the Bible, there's a purpose for everything in the Bible. We just have to be ready and waiting for Jesus to come, because I believe the time is short. I mean, the things happening in the Middle East now, this is the last Trump. That's the last, very bad joke. This last Trump, yeah. The final Trump. We're going to be gone pretty soon. But there's a lot of things happening in the world that you should be attentive to, but also should stir in your heart to say, what does God want me to do now more than ever? So that's it.
Yeah, so it's real important to come back next week, because with what he's going to continue next week and bring into modern Israel, that's really also going to enlighten us more further with the end time prophecies and how we're moving into end time prophecy today with what's happening in Israel, in the Middle East now. So please encourage you to come back next week, as we'll be tying some more of the Old Testament prophecies with end time prophecies next week. I remember the other announcement, and that's I mean, I wanted to share that part, but I remember the other announcement. So we're having a bake sale Sunday. All proceeds going to the building next door. We encourage all of you, as many of you as possible, bring some home-baked goods, bring them here, donate them to the cause. Again, all the proceeds are going to the building next door. So that's it. So if you want to help out with the bake sale, you don't need to stay and sell it. You just come and drop it off. We got a team that'll be selling it. All you got to do is bake it, prepare it, bring it, and well, what's that? Well, if you don't, you can buy. Just give them to me if you don't want to eat it. I'll eat it. So that's it. So reminder, and again, don't forget, make plans for the 24th, Christmas Eve. Also to bring your favorite Christmas dessert on Christmas Eve for our candlelight service, to share with the men that are here from the recovery center as we bless them, and the boys from the shelter as well. So join us on Christmas Eve at 6 p.m. on the 24th. Amen. Let's close out in prayer. Yes, sir, Paul. I don't know about a choir practice tomorrow. Was that something that Ben had brought to your attention? Okay, yeah, so that would Ben would know that information, so I'll give you Ben's number afterwards. I don't know anything about that rehearsal. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Ben's coordinating all that for the Christmas production on December 22nd, but I don't know when all those rehearsals are. The actual presentation of what you guys are working on will happen on the 22nd. Yes. But if there's rehearsal tomorrow, you may need to be there, because otherwise you won't be ready for the 22nd. Yeah, okay. All right. Anything else? Any other questions? All right, let's pray. My God, we give you praise, glory, and honor, my Lord, for this evening. Thank you, Lord, for your word and the instruction this evening. Help us, my God, to understand how these historical events, my Lord, tie into your second coming. We ask, my God, that we would continue to pursue you, that we would pant after you, my Lord, like a deer does the water, that we'll continue to be in pursuit of your truth, your knowledge, and your presence. We ask, Lord, that you protect everybody within the hearing of these words. Give us health and safety, my Lord. And we ask, Lord, that you would bring us back here very quickly so we can join in each other's fellowship and experience you as we grow together. In Jesus' name we pray. And all the saints said, amen. God bless you. Have a wonderful night.